This is a newly released series based on the Texas Murder Case, Love and Death, starring Elizabeth Olsen, the Scarlet Witch from Marvel. Candy used to have a happy and fulfilling family. Two well-behaved, adorable, and obedient children. She seemed to have everything, but eventually became a terrifying serial killer. By a chance encounter, Candy was deeply attracted to Alan from the same church. Since the day they had their first physical contact, Candy, no matter when or where, was always thinking about the man who made her fall. Finally, one day she couldn't resist anymore, and got into Alan's car, and expressed her feelings to him. Alan was taken aback by this sudden confession. Candy quickly turned around and went back to her own car. In the days that followed, Alan also began to waver towards Candy, looking at the phone within reach. In the end, he still prioritized his own family. He resisted the urge to call Candy. Later, the two met again at the church. Looking at Candy sitting across from him, Alan's heart started to beat uncontrollably. That night, he called out to Candy, who was about to leave, asking if she still meant what she said last time. Candy asked Alan to get into her car, hoping he would have an affair with her. After hearing that, Alan responded that he had a wife who had just become pregnant. He didn't want to betray his wife, but Candy told him that she also didn't want to ruin her own family. So they were just satisfying their desires. Alan also leaned in and gave Candy a passionate kiss. The two of them made a phone call the next day to arrange a meeting to discuss the details of their date. Candy listed a series of terms. One of them is that they cannot develop real feelings for each other. Then they set tomorrow as the day their date begins. Candy got up early, dressed up, and put on a beautiful dress. After sending her two children to school, she went to a motel to prepare the meal. Alan then rushed over. Their first date was born. Every weekend, the two of them would secretly meet outside the city. As their number of dates increased, Candy realized that she seemed to be falling in love with Alan. Along with Alan's wife giving birth to a son, Alan clearly started to distance himself from Candy. Candy has now reached the point where she can't live without Alan. Because of this, Alan found Candy hoping to end this relationship. Upon hearing that Alan wanted to end their relationship, Candy immediately started arguing with him. However, seeing the happy scene of Alan's family, Candy also decided to repair the relationship between herself and her husband. By chance, Alan's wife, Betty, invited Candy to their home as a guest. Suddenly, he asked Candy if she had any connection with her husband. Candy immediately denied it upon hearing that. However, Betty turned around and picked up an axe from the kitchen. An extramarital affair made this girl in front of him become a terrifying Texas murder demon. A few months ago, Candy accidentally collided with Alan from the same church, colliding with a full heart. In those short few seconds when the two collided, Candy felt a long-lost palpitation. So he decided to have a purely physical relationship with Alan. Extramarital affair without emotional involvement. As the number of dates between them increased, Candy also started involuntarily arousing possessiveness towards Alan. However, when Alan and Betty's child was born, Alan proposed to Candy to temporarily suspend their extramarital affair. I thought everything would go back to normal as before. However, Betty, who suffered from postpartum depression, always felt that something was going on between her husband and Candy. Sure enough, after his questioning, Candy admitted that they had a connection. Betty turned around and took out an axe from the kitchen. Candy tried to calm Betty down and told her not to get excited. But at this moment, Betty was completely consumed by fear. She kept repeating no more in the future. Candy went to meet her own husband again. Candy was also somewhat at a loss from being scared by Betty. Grabbing his backpack, he planned to leave here quickly. Suddenly, Betty told Candy to go pick up her daughter. Then, they would go swimming with her daughter tomorrow. After saying that, she put down the axe and walked into the bedroom to get a towel. Anxiously, Candy picked up Betty's daughter's swimsuit. Turning around, he found that Betty was already behind him. Just as Candy was about to apologize to Betty again, Betty, however, pushed Candy out like crazy. Then, she picked up the axe that was on the ground and walked towards Candy. Candy tightly gripped the handle of the axe to prevent Betty from hurting him. Unexpectedly, Betty suddenly exerted all her strength and directly smashed Candy's forehead, leaving a gash. Then he smashed Candy's toes again. The intense pain made Candy scream sharply. At the same time, the phone at Betty's house rang. It was her husband, Alan, calling. But no one answered for a long time. Candy walked out of Betty's house unharmed. She got in her car and left this place of trouble. Only the neighbor's little girl was left, continuously ringing the doorbell at Betty's house. Pressing the doorbell at Betty's house. On the way, Candy recalled everything that had just happened. This also caused her to miss the green light. She first went back home and threw the blood-stained clothes into the washing machine. Then she cleaned her injured toes. After changing into a pair of flat shoes, she walked out of the house. She arrived at Betty's daughter's school to pick her up after school. After adjusting her emotions, She got out of the car and started to call her friends. Narrate my own timeline. Ensure that everyone can help me provide false testimony in the future. Meanwhile, Alan, who has been unable to contact his wife, anxiously pacing around in the hotel. He called his 3 neighbors separately, asking them to go to his house and check the situation. As the bloodstains on the bathroom wall suddenly appeared before them, the 3 of them realized something was wrong. Sure enough, they saw Betty's body in the laundry room. He was brutally dismembered by Candy. Just how sinister is this woman? To conceal the fact that she killed someone, she kept emphasizing her own timeline to her friends, to ensure that when she is investigated by the police in the future, they can help provide testimony for her. Afterwards, he acted as if nothing had happened, taking the 3 children to go swimming. The neighbor informed Alan about Betty's murder. Hearing about his wife's murder, Alan stood frozen in place. He called Candy. Candy pretended to be very sad, comforting Alan and asking him to grieve. The police arrived at the scene quickly. Seeing Betty's mutilated body lying in a pool of blood, everyone believed it was the work of a cult. People capable of doing such things have a bit of a twisted mind. The police chief asked Alan who had been to his house today. Alan told him that only his friend Candy had come. After the police's preliminary investigation, the conclusion was that the killer was likely a woman. The footprints left at the scene were very small, clearly left by a woman or a child. Alan rushed back the next day. He sat on the couch feeling lost, complaining that he shouldn't have left his wife alone while on a business trip. Just then, Candy arrived with his daughter. Watching Alan tell the girl about Betty leaving, Candy could no longer control his tears. He ran forward and hugged Alan and the girl tightly, leaving her husband Pat standing there, staring at the 3 of them in a daze. The church also began discussing Betty's murder. Anxious and uneasy, Candy called his friend Don aside, asking if he would be considered the prime suspect by the police. Don told him that based on Betty being dismembered, the killer must be a very strong male. Therefore, it doesn't need to have any burden. Just tell the police directly what you know. At Betty's memorial service, someone asked Candy to put the food in the refrigerator. Watching the scene where he had once cruelly hacked Betty, Candy's heart suddenly started beating uncontrollably. At that moment, Betty's mother walked in. It interrupted Candy's reminiscing. Luckily, he just happened to be passing by. Candy let out a sigh of relief. Candy went to the police station that afternoon for questioning. He answered the police's questions fluently. There is not the slightest flaw revealed. It wasn't until the police mentioned the footprints at Betty's house. Candy quickly said that he was wearing a pair of sneakers at the time. The first thing he did when he got back home afterwards was to cut the slippers he wore that day into pieces. The police asked Alan if Betty had ever cheated. Alan told them that his wife had cheated on him before out of spite. She had cheated with a college student. But after that, such things never happened again. The police then asked if he had ever cheated. Alan immediately denied it. However, when he returned home, he called the police chief again and told him that he had lied today, that he had cheated on Candy before, and that he could very well be the killer of his own wife. Ever since Candy brutally killed Betty, he has become restless every day, always standing in one place, lost in thought. Suddenly, a rapid phone ring woke up Candy. It turned out to be the police chief calling him, because Alan had previously revealed the secret to him. So he hoped that Candy could come and cooperate with the investigation. After collecting his fingerprints, a police officer asked Candy if he had anything to do with Alan. Faced with the questioning gazes of the 3 police officers present, Candy could only admit that it was true. The police immediately asked if he had killed Betty. Candy was stunned for a moment, then denied it firmly, even though Candy denied her statement. But the police still believed that Candy was the murderer. He tried to break through Candy's emotional defenses, but Candy remained as calm as ever. No matter what the police said, he denied being the murderer. The police chief told him that even if he didn't admit to killing someone, the jury would still consider him the culprit. His fingerprints and footprints left at Betty's house could be crucial evidence in this case. The police found his newly bought slippers in Candy's car. He asked Candy to hand them over to him. Then he demanded that Candy also hand over the shoes he was currently wearing. Helpless, Candy had no choice but to comply with his demands. After leaving the police station, Candy went to her friend Don's law firm. Don asked Candy's husband Pat to leave for a while. "I need to talk to Candy alone for a while." Candy revealed to Don about her past with Alan. "And on the day of the incident, Betty was questioning me about it." Don, who realized something was wrong, made Candy immediately contact everyone in the church, confirm that they saw Candy on the day of the incident, appeared as a normal person. As long as he passes the police lie detector test, they can use witness testimony to help him clear his name. At the same time, he must not have any contact with Alan to prevent any complications. Meanwhile, Alan received a call from the police. They told him that the killer is likely Candy. Hearing that his former lover is actually the killer of his wife. Alan called Betty's parents outside. He admitted to having had another relationship before. The killer who murdered his wife is very likely it's his own lover. All the media in the town are reporting that Candy is the killer, but Candy acts as if nothing happened, serenely being a housewife at home. Coincidentally, Don called him at this time. He hopes Candy can come to the law firm to see him. On the way, Candy swayed to the rhythm of the music. A strange smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. Don hopes Candy can tell him the truth. In his opinion, Candy seems to be hiding something. Candy admits that she killed Betty. And the cause of all this? It's because Betty attacked her first and tried to kill her. This woman was summoned by the police for murder. The defense lawyer comforts her and tells her not to be nervous. After all, the police do not have enough evidence to charge him. However, what the two of them didn't expect was that, because the bloody fingerprints on Betty's refrigerator matched Candy's, Candy was directly arrested on the spot. The police asked him to take off all his clothes for inspection. Seeing the bruises and wounds on Candy's body, the police became even more convinced that she was the serial killer. Don told Pat about Candy's arrest. Pat was immediately furious upon hearing that his wife had been arrested. He urged Don to quickly find a way to bail Candy out of jail. Don also assured him that he would definitely be able to rescue Candy tomorrow morning. At this time, Alan also learned the news of Candy's arrest. He walked into the kitchen trying to recreate the scene of the incident. The sudden knock on the door startled Alan. The Big Bear turned out to be his neighbor delivering dinner to him. The next morning, Tang made a statement to the media. Candy, such a frail woman. How could the Big Bear possibly lift such a heavy axe? The culprit in this case is clearly a male. The police's accusations against him are completely nonsense. The reason why Tang is willing to support Candy at all costs, not only because they have been good friends for many years. Similarly, Candy is the victim in this case. He wants Candy to focus on losing weight from now on. He hopes to see on the day of the trial. Candy has the image of a frail housewife. The Big Bear completely doesn't fit the profile of a killer who can swing an axe to murder. The Big Bear also suggested that Candy go see a psychologist. He wants to know what kind of person Candy is now. When she got home, Candy began to tell her husband about what Don had told her. Her husband sensed that Candy was hiding something from him. He tried to get Candy to be completely open with him, but in the end, they parted ways unhappily. Candy knew well her husband's sense of justice. She told him that it would only result in her ending up in jail. 2 weeks later, the first trial was held as scheduled. Don proposed changing the location of the trial. This would help Candy gain more public support. However, the judge clearly did not agree. He directly rejected Don's request in court. Watching the judge's tough attitude towards her case on TV, Candy couldn't bear to watch and turned off the TV. A friend asked Pat if Candy had talked to him about the matter. Pat said that although he had many questions, whenever he asked Candy about it, they would end up arguing and not on good terms. Candy happened to come down from upstairs, heard the two of them discussing about oneself. He hopes that the two of them must believe in him. I really am not the murderer who killed Betty. The next morning, Candy went to see the psychologist with Tang. As the psychologist kept giving instructions, Candy gradually entered into a hypnotic state. The psychologist asked Candy to go back to the day of the incident. Tell him what exactly happened that day. Candy said that she hated Betty very much. It was him who made her life a mess now. The psychologist tried to make Candy enter into a deeper level of memory. Candy said that she saw Betty coming towards her again with an axe. He shouted for Betty not to come closer, but unfortunately, the psychologist had already awakened him. That terrifying experience in his mind, as Candy let out a terrified scream. Don, who was waiting outside, mistakenly thought something was wrong with Candy. He ran into the ward, but was stopped by the psychiatrist. Seeing Candy emotionally lose control and cry, holding her head, he asked the doctor if it was possible that he was faking it. The psychiatrist hypnotized Candy to make her not feel any pain. Sure enough, he took a safety pin and pricked Candy's arm. Candy didn't react at all. In the evening, Pat received a call from Don. After seeing the terrifying side of Candy's inner self, he decided to tell the truth to Pat. Pat, upon learning the truth, was torn between two choices. On one hand, his wife whom he had been living with. On the other hand, the justice he stood for. In order to rid himself of the suspicion of murder, Candy followed the advice of her defense lawyer, Don, and transformed into a kind-hearted housewife. She, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, is going to attend today's trial. Before leaving, she also instructed her husband not to let the children watch TV, to prevent her own affairs from affecting the children. For a town that has never experienced such a vicious incident, Candy's murder case has attracted countless visits from town residents. The entire courthouse entrance is packed with people. Everyone is discussing fervently, did Candy really kill Betty? After the prosecution finished presenting their evidence to the jury, it was Don's turn to present his defense. Unexpectedly, he stood up and directly told everyone present that the fact is Candy brutally hacked Betty to death, and the reason she did this was entirely in self-defense. Don's defense speech also caused a direct adjournment of the trial. As Don walked out of the courthouse, he informed all the media present, "I hope they can approach this matter rationally, because the truth often goes beyond this." Then he walked up to Pastor Ron. "Make sure he thinks it through carefully. What kind of person is Candy after all? His testimony will bring them a partial victory." Seeing her husband and children all silent during the meal, Candy tried to ease the awkward atmosphere, but when he heard his daughter mention her own incident, he quickly told her to eat well and not talk. Just then, an old friend came to visit.